Hey guys, tonight we're stepping quietly into a plush, velvet draped room in the heart of Paris, where the wallpaper is embroidered with golden bees, and somewhere behind a silk folding screen, the most powerful man in Europe is having a situation. The air smells like rose water and furniture polish, and there's the soft creaking of a copper bathtub that is, at this very moment, refusing to let go of its imperial occupant. Yes, Napoleon Bonaparte, conqueror of Egypt, breaker of coalitions, and the reason half of Europe once needed new maps, is stuck in a tub, naked, for 3 whole hours. The room is uncomfortably humid. Steam drifts lazily towards the carved ceiling, and you can almost hear the soft splash of a toe trying and failing to gain traction. Meanwhile, the guards outside the chamber door stand very still. They've been told not to enter unless the building is on fire, and even then, maybe knock first. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere cozy right now, post your location and local time in the comments. I always love seeing where you all drift off to. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in the Tuileries Palace in the winter of 1811. The snow outside is coming down in cautious, elegant flakes. Inside, the Emperor of the French has just lowered himself into his favorite deep copper tub, a generous oval thing lined with towels and warmed by a steaming jug poured in with great ceremony by his valet, Constant. Napoleon likes his baths long. He sometimes reads reports from ministers while soaking. Occasionally he falls asleep. But tonight something goes oddly wrong. Maybe it's the soap, perhaps too much almond oil this time, or maybe it's the recent wax polish on the inside of the tub. Either way, when the time comes to stand, he doesn't. Not because he won't, but because he can't. He shifts, slips, tries again, stuck. The copper has created some kind of impossible suction around his backside. And now every wiggle just makes the situation worse. Somewhere outside the door, Constant is pretending to rearrange linens, perhaps delaying his return to give the emperor more dignity or plausible deniability. Historians still argue whether this event actually happened or if it was a private joke passed between staff and recorded later in coded memoirs. But there is more than one surviving valet diary that hints at an evening incident involving warmth, water, and extreme patience. Let's rewind a few hours. Napoleon had returned early from a military meeting, complaining of fatigue and a tightness in his chest. Not serious, just constricted. Josephine was long gone by now. He had remarried and the palace was unusually quiet. He asked for a bath, not a doctor. Water always relaxed him. His tub wasn't the most extravagant in Europe, but it had sentimental value. A gift from Josephine, back when they still flirted through scented letters and botanical puns. It had little lion paw feet, a carved rim, and a habit of retaining heat, far better than any marble alternative. Now imagine Napoleon climbing in. Short, strong-legged, somewhat top-heavy, and not entirely graceful when wet. He had no intention of soaking for 3 hours. But time, like empire, can get away from you. And so begins his sticky ordeal. He shifts again. A wet squelch echoes across the marble floor. He tries to hoist himself with his elbow's bad idea. He nearly slides under completely. Water sloshes. A candle flickers. Dignity leaks slowly into the floorboards. Eventually he calls out. Not loudly, just a dignified constant. Then perhaps a second time, slightly more nasal. Still no answer. This continues 10 minutes, 20, maybe 30. No one comes. Napoleon considers his options. He could ring the bell, but that means whoever responds might bring more than just the valet. There's protocol. If he yells, it might be a footman, or worse, his chamberlain. And there are rumors that someone has been writing down embarrassing incidents to sell to publishers later. He won't give them this, so he waits. Meanwhile, across the room, the fire crackles helpfully. A glass of sugared wine goes undrunk. Somewhere in the corridor, a maid is brushing dust off a portrait of the emperor in full military regalia, utterly unaware that the man in the painting is currently butt-stuck in a water vessel. This is not the moment history remembers. Not Austerlitz. Not Gina. But it may be more revealing, because this was a man who believed every moment mattered, who drafted the policy in bed, who dictated letters mid-haircut, who once demanded a diplomatic summary while having his teeth cleaned. And now he sits pink and pruny, waiting for help that won't come. The irony isn't lost on him. At least we hope not. This is the same man who ordered an army to march into Russia in winter, perhaps overconfident in his ability to get unstuck from difficult situations. Eventually, some say nearly 3 hours later, a tentative knock. "Majesty, shall I bring your slippers?" Slippers. As if this were a normal evening. As if he hadn't just performed an interpretive ballet with a copper basin. He grumbles something incomprehensible. Constant enters. A long pause. Then, "Did Monsieur enjoy his soak?" To his credit, Constant helps him out without a word. Dignity, after all, is a team sport. You dry yourself off, muttering that the tub has shrunk. You vow to have it replaced. But deep down, you suspect the tub has won. And that, dear listener, is how one of the greatest figures in European history spent 3 hours one evening, stuck in a copper bathtub, too proud to shout, too slippery to rise, and too imperial to admit it. Morning in the Tuileries begins not with a trumpet, but with the gentle clink of porcelain and the quiet rush of hot water being poured. You wake before the sun, not because you're eager to conquer Europe, but because your valet has already drawn your bath. Again. The scent of lavender hangs in the air like a polite cloud, and your silk robe, pale blue, embroidered with a subtle bee motif, has been warmed by the fire. Napoleon's morning routine is less military briskness and more fussy spa day in slow motion. You pad across the carpet in your soft-soled slippers, aware that 7 people have already been awake for 2 hours just to make sure your soap is placed at the correct angle. First comes the splash. Not a full immersion, no. That would be uncivilized, but a gentle seated soak. The water must be exactly lukewarm. Not hot, not cool. You once ordered a thermometer burned because it disagreed with your hand. Then, a brief shampoo, done with a mixture of eggs and cologne. Yes, eggs. That was the fashion. Sort of. Historians still argue whether Napoleon truly believed in this blend, or merely tolerated it, because Josephine once complimented it. After your soak, it's towel time. Not 1 towel, not 2, but 5. And all have designated roles. 1 for the face, 1 for the arms, 1 strictly for behind the ears. A separate foot towel, of course. And 1, just in case a 6th is suddenly needed. Better to be prepared. You did, after all, once cross the Alps with less gear than your bathing table now holds. Cologne follows lots of it. Napoleon adored scent. He didn't merely dab it, he drenched it. His favorite was a citrus-heavy concoction made with rosemary, bergamot, and lemon peel. He'd use nearly a bottle a day. Rumors say he even drank diluted cologne when water wasn't available. Whether true or not, the man smelled like a walking lemon grove, which, considering the sanitation norms of the era, was an upgrade. As you sit down at the dressing table, two valets begin work. One powders the shoulders, the other combs the hair into its neat oiled form. Napoleon never wore a wig, though that was still in fashion. He preferred his own dark curls, flattened into submission with a brush that had a silver handle shaped like an eagle. Meanwhile, a secretary reads the morning bulletins. You nod, still toweling your feet. Somewhere in the middle of a grain report, you grunt, too many oats, and move on. This was Napoleon's kingdom, one towel at a time. Even during military campaigns, the emperor maintained this odd blend of luxury and ritual. He once had a traveling bath apparatus, carried in pieces by 3 separate servants. In one campaign, a bath was drawn from water, boiled in a cannon barrel. Another time, while camping near the Rhine, he had a heated copper basin placed inside his tent. His soldiers, by contrast, were lucky to bathe in a muddy stream once a month. One particular footnote from 1806 describes how his valet poured scented water over his hands while they stood ankle-deep in battlefield mud. The juxtaposition was absurd. Boots caked in grime, hands smelling like orange blossoms. And yet, Napoleon believed in ceremony. Even filth should be managed with flair. He also hated body odor, especially other people's. There are written orders reprimanding officers for appearing unwashed. One general received a scathing note. Your tactics are admirable. Your stench is not. Oddly enough, his obsession with cleanliness didn't extend to laundry. Napoleon wore the same uniform for days. His shirts, too, were often reused, though always pressed. He claimed to prefer the lived-in feel of fabric and insisted that starch was the enemy of speed. A curious contradiction for a man who had separate scissors for mustache trimming and nose hair maintenance. And don't get him started on his boots. Each pair was rubbed with a mixture of tallow and rose oil. They had to be soft enough to wear without socks. Napoleon hated socks. He claimed they stifled his circulation. Again, historians still debate whether this was a health concern or a result of one bad sock incident during childhood. Either way, no socks. Ever. His valet, Constant, once wrote that the most stressful part of each morning was getting Napoleon's boots on. Not because they were tight, though they were, but because the emperor would often use the process as a metaphor for statecraft. One memorable morning. You see, Constant, Napoleon said, leg raised, governing a nation is like putting on this boot. It resists, it tightens, but with force and precision. Grunt, you win. To which Constant reportedly replied, very wise, sire. Now, if I may, your left foot? At least once, the entire morning routine was interrupted by a pigeon. Yes, a pigeon. It flew in through an open window, landed directly on the emperor's shoulder, and proceeded to peck curiously at a half-dressed Napoleon. Instead of shouting, he calmly observed, even nature delivers its messages. Then asked for a towel. Not to swat it, just to encourage it to find the window again. But perhaps the most amusing part of this whole routine was how late it made him. Napoleon, master of time on the battlefield, was chronically behind schedule when at home. Josephine once teased him about this, saying he could conquer a continent but not his own hair part. So you rise from your dressing table, powdered, scented, shiny, and stride toward the next room where breakfast awaits. On the tray, a roll, a slice of melon, a cup of barley coffee. Simple, Spartan even. Because while the man loved baths, he didn't much love food. But we'll get to that later. Right now, you're fully dressed in your trademark uniform. Gray coat, white breeches, black boots, and a hint of orange flower water trailing behind. Ready to lead an empire or at least a cabinet meeting. And somewhere deep in your subconscious, you're already planning your evening bath. You just won't admit it yet. Corsica isn't exactly where you'd expect an emperor's story to begin. It smells like pine resin, goat cheese, and dried seaweed. And the young boy running barefoot across its dusty courtyards has no empire, only a stubborn cowlick, and a name too long for school roll call, Napoleone di Buonaparte. You're about 7 years old. Your accent is thick, your hands are grubby, and you hate wearing shoes. The communal bathhouse in Ajaccio, such as it is a tepid stone tub with cracked tiles and unpredictable temperatures. The older kids tease you for clutching your own bar of soap. It's goat fat based, smells a bit like lunch. One afternoon, your mother sends you to bathe with your brother Joseph. But Joseph has ideas, namely finding a way to splash you into the cold corner of the tub while keeping all the warm water for himself. It doesn't go well. You sulk, then slip, then shout, then storm out, wrapped in someone else's towel. It isn't until you're halfway home that you realize you've also accidentally taken someone else's sponge. You never return it. Historians still argue whether this incident, recorded in family letters, was exaggerated or symbolic. But one thing's clear. Even as a child, Napoleon had a complicated relationship with bathing. He both craved the calm and resented the lack of control. Corsican hygiene customs were rustic. Families often shared water. Baths were rare. Instead, you'd get wiped down with a cloth soaked in lavender-infused vinegar, or stand in a mountain stream until your teeth chattered. Napoleon, famously fussy, hated both methods. He once declared at the age of 10, "I shall someday have a bath indoors." With heat, his family laughed, but not too hard, because even then, he had that look, the look that said, "I'm not kidding." A look that would one day make half of Europe flinch before he even opened his mouth. At military school in Brienne, things didn't improve. Bathing was infrequent, communal, and ice cold. Imagine being 13, far from home, surrounded by snobby French boys who mocked your accent, your small stature, and your insistence on cleaning behind your ears. Napoleon was not popular. He was, however, memorably clean. He'd barter portions of bread for extra soap. And once, when punished with latrine duty, he'd use the excuse to study the habits of human hygiene. Whether that's true or a revisionist myth, it sounds like something he'd say. The cold water baths at school were brutal. You stand barefoot on the stone, trying to look brave, while boys around you shriek like seagulls. The water smells of iron and old pipes. You dunk your head, gasp, and then retreat to your cot, dreaming of someday owning a tub big enough to stretch your legs, maybe even in copper. Years later, when he did become emperor, he wrote to the Minister of Public Works demanding better bathhouses for cadets, warm water, decent privacy, and less mildew, he scribbled in the margins. But even before the crown, Napoleon's odd preoccupation with bathing would show up again. Take Toulon, 1793. You're a promising young officer. The siege is brutal, mud everywhere. but you still order your aides to warm a kettle so you can wipe down with a sponge before inspecting the artillery. A colonel laughs. You stare. He never laughs again. And then there's Egypt. Hot, dusty, full of bugs. But somehow, Napoleon manages to stay fresh. His officers joke that he sweats cologne. He reportedly bathed in a canvas tub, dragged into the desert, surrounded by guards, and on one occasion a camel that kept trying to drink the bathwater. Fringe fact: Napoleon hated sand in his clothes more than enemy fire. He'd spend a half an hour each evening brushing it out of his boots, muttering about grains of betrayal. He even instructed his laundress to line his undergarments with silk to prevent invasion. Of sand, not armies. One surviving journal from a soldier in Egypt mentions that Napoleon once lectured on the importance of personal hygiene during a dust storm. "A clean man," he shouted through the wind, "commands more respect even in defeat." The soldiers mostly just nodded, shielding their eyes. Back in Corsica, though, those early memories linger. The sting of vinegar cloths, the shame of being laughed at in the bathhouse, the sponge that wasn't yours, but became yours. Even as emperor, Napoleon reportedly traveled with a small linen pouch containing a soap scrap he never used, wrapped in oilcloth, marked A in tiny embroidery. Was it sentimental? Superstitious? Historians debate it still. But the sponge? That was long gone. Baths for Napoleon were more than cleanliness. They were proof of progress, of rising above muddy childhoods and shared buckets, of controlling the uncontrollable, even if it meant bossing your soap into submission. You step out of the tub one evening in the Tuileries and catch yourself in the mirror. Damp hair, reddened skin, a strange expression you don't quite recognize. For a moment, you're that kid again, scowling in the corner of a cracked Corsican bathhouse, arms crossed, plotting your future. Only now, the tub is warm, the soap is French, and the sponge, still borrowed, eternally borrowed. It's years later now, and you're not in Corsica anymore. You're not even a low-ranking artillery officer hoping someone remembers your name. You are Napoleon Bonaparte, general of the French army, first consul, and soon to be emperor. Your boots are shinier than most men's dreams, your dispatches are feared across borders, and your hygiene, impeccable. Well, relatively speaking. Welcome to the camp at Marengo, 1800. The ground is hard, the horses are cranky, and the soldiers are frankly ripe. You step from your tent, breathing in the unmistakable perfume of wet leather, pipe smoke, and what can only be described as historic body odor. You wrinkle your nose discreetly, of course. Because cleanliness to you is not a luxury, it's a standard. And in this muddy, frostbitten mess of a military campaign, it is also your battlefield. Let's be honest. Most of your men haven't bathed in weeks. The average French soldier carried bread, a flask, and perhaps, if lucky, a scrap of cloth they occasionally waved at their armpits. The idea of a full-body scrub? Absurd. Showers didn't exist, and rivers were often occupied by horses, laundry, or the enemy. But you, well, you've arranged for something better. A canvas tub. Carried in pieces by mule, assembled in your tent like some strange military jigsaw. It takes 4 servants to boil enough water, and another 2 to screen off the area. You're Napoleon. You bathe. Even if it means using up a fire meant for cooking soup. Your soldiers call it the general's steam ritual. They joke about it, but they also envy it. One officer writes in his diary, The emperor rises cleansed while we ferment. Historians still argue whether Napoleon truly bathed every day on campaign, or whether he simply freshened up with scented vinegar cloths. Some say he only soaked when he expected to meet envoys. Others claim he insisted on nightly scrubbing regardless of time, weather, or musket fire. What we do know is this: he always smelled better than everyone else. A fellow officer once complained, "You can smell Bonaparte coming before you hear his boots." That wasn't an insult. It was a mixture of neroli, bergamot, and orange blossom water. There's even a story, fringe but persistent, that during the Italian campaign, an Austrian general surrendered earlier than expected simply because Napoleon's tent smelled so elegant it was unnerving. Likely an exaggeration. But the idea of winning by scent, pure Napoleonic flair. Your soldiers, on the other hand, develop what you might call an ecosystem. Their coats are alive, their socks are rigid, lice are common, and euphemistically referred to as trench metals. One soldier claimed his uniform could stand on its own. Another swore his hat whispered insults at night. Still, they fight. Still, they follow you. Because even in their grime, they see your polish as proof that something better exists. That if you can remain crisp and clean while artillery thunder echoes in the distance, then maybe this isn't madness, it's destiny. And of course, you lecture them. After a victory, you're known to gather troops and remind them, France is glorious, but soap is necessary. You once ordered every regiment to construct a makeshift bath area, even if it meant using beer barrels cut in half. It didn't go over well. Several soldiers drank the soap water rather than wash. Josephine, too, had her limits. She loved perfumes. Her boudoir smelled like a florist's dream and an alchemist's nightmare. But when it came to actual bathing, less enthusiastic, she preferred light sponging, floral water sprays, and long naps wrapped in silk sheets. You, however, wanted her soaked. You even had a marble tub carved for her as a wedding gift, complete with gilded feet shaped like sphinxes. She used it once, claimed it was too cold and too imperial. You were heartbroken, but you pretended not to mind. Back to your troops. There's one night outside Oul when you try to boost morale by offering a barrel of warmed water to the dirtiest soldier. A prize, a game. But no one wants to go first. Because dirt, by now, is armor, it's dignity, and perhaps, oddly, comfort. So you step forward, roll up your sleeves, dip a hand in, then proceed to give yourself a sponge bath in full view. Not all of you, of course, just arms, face, neck, enough to make a point. It works, sort of. A few brave souls follow suit. One guy just drinks the water and says he feels clean on the inside. And yet, the contrast remains. You are the polished leader among sweaty ghosts, the lavender breeze in a campfire storm, the man whose very cleanliness feels almost divine. Perhaps that's why, when things go wrong, you feel it first in your skin. When defeats approach, your appetite fades. Your bath lasts longer. You stay in the water not to wash away grime, but doubt. There's a superstition forming among your aides. If Napoleon bathes past sunset, it means trouble. If he adds rose oil, expect bad news. If he skips the soak altogether, run. One aide wrote, "He was silent that night, soaking like a statue." We all feared the news, and the news came. Spain. But that's a different story. Tonight, back in Marengo, you towel off. A servant brushes your coat. Your valet hands you your boots. You say nothing about the lice in the next tent. But you ordered soap to be distributed anyway. 2 cakes per squad. You can't command them to be clean, but you can lead by scent. And as you step out into the night air, one soldier says under his breath, "The emperor smells like victory, Paris again." Not the glittering salons or the royal courts this time, but down below where the pipes moan, the drains gurgle, and history smells faintly of mildew. Welcome to the underworld of 18th century French plumbing, a place that shaped the bathing habits of emperors, paupers, and everyone in between. You step into a narrow stone corridor beneath a merchant's home. It's dim, damp, and confusingly warm. A rivulet of water runs past your boots, though calling it water might be generous. Above ground, the boulevards are powdered and perfumed, but down here, the city leaks its truth. By the time young Napoleon arrives in Paris as a teen, public sanitation is still an improvisation. Indoor plumbing is rare. Water is hauled by hand, stored in barrels, or bought from men pushing wooden carts and shouting "Eau fraîche" through the streets. If you want to bathe, you have options, none of them ideal. Option 1, the public bathhouse. Noisy, steamy, shared. You pay a few sous to sit in water that you hope was changed recently. There are wooden tubs, stiff towels, and possibly a grumpy old man named Gerard who watches the soap too closely. Option 2, a tin tub in your room, folded under a bed, dragged out by servants, filled laboriously by a kettle. This is for the wealthy or ambitious. Napoleon, even as a struggling cadet, saves enough for this luxury once a week. He times it with letter writing so he can describe the experience to Josephine in nauseatingly floral terms. "The warmth rises, my love, like your scent upon my pillow." She swoons, or pretends to. But here's the truth. Parisian plumbing at the time was a mess. Water is drawn from the Seine, the same Seine where people wash clothes, dump waste, and occasionally lose things they shouldn't have brought near a current. Drinking water? Questionable. Bath water? Not much better. Historians still argue whether Napoleon ever pushed for plumbing reform as a matter of public health or personal comfort. What is certain, during his reign, bathhouses were renovated, fountains restored, and city workers tasked with cleaning the very pipes that once coughed up frogs. Yes, frogs. A fringe fact from a 1799 municipal report notes that amphibians occasionally emerged from kitchen drains. One startled noblewoman claimed a chorus of croaks from the basin interrupted her tea. She wrote to the ministry. She received in response a bottle of rosewater and no explanation. Napoleon naturally saw opportunity in this chaos. Water meant control. The man who could regulate cleanliness could regulate people. He ordered a review of aqueducts, personally toured cisterns, and once summoned an engineer at 3 a.m. to ask, "Why does my bath smell like cabbage?" And yet, his palace wasn't immune. At the Tuileries, leaks were common. One persistent drip from the ceiling over his favorite writing desk drove him to relocate an entire council meeting to a less prestigious room. "Better wet pride than wet paper," he quipped, or maybe grumbled. Either way, the drip survived longer than some of his ministers. In Josephine's wing of the palace, the water situation was slightly better. She had copper pipes fitted, an absurd luxury at the time, which delivered water directly to her bath. The system worked mostly, until a cold snap in 1802 froze the pipes solid and burst them from the walls. Servants screamed. A tapestry was ruined. Napoleon arrived, surveyed the damage, and allegedly muttered, "France endures worse." But let's not forget the bidet. Yes, that staple of French hygiene was already a thing, and Napoleon quite possibly used one. His traveling furniture included a mysterious low basin with a fold-out screen. Some say it was for foot washing. Others suggest different regions. He never spoke of it publicly. But he did once say, "Cleanliness is a form of discipline. Make of that what you will." Meanwhile, the average citizen still bathed once a week, if that. And most did it in front of the fireplace using a kettle, a cloth, and immense hope. Plumbing didn't improve much until long after Napoleon's time. But his obsession with cleanliness helped push things forward. He funded engineers, rewarded innovation, and even sponsored a contest for better water distribution in public areas. The winner? A man with a horse-drawn filtration cart. It didn't revolutionize anything, but it won a medal and a handshake. One aide, writing in exile years later, recalled he hated nothing more than a lukewarm tub and a lazy plumber. He also hated the noise from pipes. If a faucet hissed or clanged while he was bathing, he'd emerge dripping and furious. At least once he personally dictated a decree while half naked, wrapped in a towel, instructing the Minister of the Interior to resolve the wailing water demons in my chamber. And then calmly, he returned to the tub. In your dreams tonight, you might walk those old Paris pipes, hear the echoes of boots above, the slosh of hidden water below. You might pass a rat with revolutionary ambitions, or a frog in exile. But mostly, you'll remember that even emperors can't escape plumbing problems. And sometimes, the path to power begins not with a sword, but with a sponge and a bucket. You're back above ground now, and the palace smells like orange blossom, furniture wax, and just a hint of scandal. Not a political scandal, no. This is a domestic sort. The kind that begins with a scented envelope and ends with someone buying too much soap. Let's talk about noses, specifically Napoleon's. And what happens when royal hygiene meets olfactory obsession? Napoleon's sense of smell was famously sharp. Some say too sharp. He could identify a person's presence in a room by lingering perfume. He could tell which valet had folded his cravat, based solely on the scent left on the fabric. He even claimed to detect when Josephine had been in his study, because her soul left a smell. A little intense, perhaps, but it explains why, in a time when most people barely washed weekly, Napoleon was elbow deep in perfumed soaps, scented oils, and colognes imported from the far corners of Europe. And it all started with a letter. Josephine, his famously elegant and occasionally extravagant wife, had a habit of dabbing her handwritten notes with her favorite scent, a musky blend of rose, civet, and clove. The first time Napoleon received one, he sniffed it, frowned, then sniffed again. "This," he reportedly said, "is witchcraft." From that moment, he became hooked not just on her letters, but on the entire world of perfumed bathing. He demanded that his own soap be made similarly. He wanted bath oils to match the scent. He commissioned a small workshop in Grasse, France, to create custom blends that evoked both command and comfort. Historians still argue whether these scents had any aphrodisiac qualities or if Napoleon simply convinced himself they did. Either way, it became a thing. He'd soak for 40 minutes in scented water, then emerge smelling like a citrus orchard on the verge of military conquest. He wasn't alone in this. The entire court began to compete in the scent department. Ministers donned their coats. Ladies layered perfume so aggressively that salons smelled like walking flower carts. One ambassador's cologne was so pungent it made a visiting Russian diplomat faint. Or so the story goes. But that humble block was king. Napoleon preferred white soaps, lightly oiled, carved into smooth ovals. His favorite scent, neroli. Extracted from orange blossoms, it was sharp, clean, and slightly bitter, like his letters to Josephine when she took too long to reply. He had a traveling soapbox made. It was velvet lined, with compartments labeled by day. On day, lemon. Tuesday, rosemary. Wednesday, almond. Whether he actually followed this schedule is debatable, but the box existed, and he guarded it like treasure. And then there were the scandals. You see, scented soap wasn't always considered pure. The church, for instance, once frowned on perfumed products, seeing them as indulgent, even morally suspect. Why mask the body God gave you? Was the popular question. The answer, of course, was because the body stinks. Napoleon ignored the critics. He bathed in oils that shimmered. He had his sheets perfumed. He even had his horses brushed with lavender water. One general claimed, "His saddle smells cleaner than my entire tent." And still, Josephine outdid him. She was the empress of olfactory power moves. Her bath water was steeped in rose petals, orange peel, and a strange hint of cinnamon. She had an entire room devoted to her perfumes. Servants entered blindfolded to avoid copying recipes with their eyes. At least, that's what she claimed. Napoleon adored her scent. When she traveled, he'd sniff her dresses. When she was angry, he'd attempt to defuse the mood by presenting a new bar of soap wrapped in silk, tied with ribbon marked Pour Mon Étoile. Fringe fact. During their brief separation before his coronation, he sent her an entire crate of rose soap. Inside was a note that read, "Because I cannot bathe in your arms, I bathe in your memory." Cheesy? Incredibly. Effective? Apparently yes, but there were limits. Once she tried a new scent, something earthy, musk-heavy, possibly containing ambergris, and he was not pleased. He reportedly said, "You smell like a forest that's been on fire." She laughed. He did not. It nearly caused a diplomatic incident when she wore that same scent to a dinner with the Austrian envoy. Napoleon kept sniffing, scowling, and eventually ordered the windows open. The envoy thought it was a gesture of insult. Josephine rolled her eyes. Politics, perfume, and pride all colliding in one poorly ventilated salon. Soap also became a symbol. When Napoleon gave out bars of soap as gifts, it meant he liked you. When he gave you unscented soap, it meant you were on thin ice. He once sent a plain bar to a certain general who'd failed to follow orders. No note, just soap. The message was clear. Clean up your act. He even commissioned a sculptor to carve a tiny bust of himself out of scented soap. It was presented as a novelty at court. Unfortunately, it melted in the summer heat, leading to the unfortunate image of a slumped, dripping Napoleon surrounded by petals and apologies. But the nose remembers. He was trained, tuned, and possibly tormented. There are reports, quiet ones, that in his later years after exile, Napoleon would sit alone, smelling an old linen handkerchief infused with Josephine's scent. Just breathing, just remembering. No power, no throne, just soap and memory. Tonight, as you lower yourself into your own imaginary imperial bath, let the steam rise like scented diplomacy. Let the lavender drift through your thoughts, carrying whispers of old love, awkward parties, and a very serious man once undone by the wrong cologne. Because sometimes, power doesn't rest in swords or maps. Sometimes it floats in a scented puff of steam, lingering just behind the ear. So you've tried the bathhouses of Corsica, sniffed the scented sheets of the Tuileries, and evaded frogs in the plumbing. Now, let's step into one of the most curious corners of imperial life, the bathtub, not as a bathing tool, but as a status symbol. You're standing in a drawing room, not a bathroom, a drawing room, because in the early 1800s, if you were wealthy and important enough, your tub wasn't tucked away behind a door. It was on display. Sometimes even right in the parlor, nestled next to a chaise lounge or beneath a chandelier. Not because people were bathing publicly, well, mostly not, but because the tub itself was a declaration. I have water, I have heat, I have time to sit still. Napoleon's own tub, his favorite one, not the campaign collapsible, was a sleek oval beast made of polished copper. It had feet shaped like lion paws, a gilded towel rail, and a rim that curved just so for neck support. The servants knew better than to polish the interior too slippery. He had already had one incident involving a fall, a yelp, and an emergency footman pile-on. Historians still argue whether this particular bathtub, the one from the Tuileries, was actually custom-made for Napoleon or repurposed from a nobleman's estate. One letter from a court carpenter claims the tub originally stood in a music salon, which raises eyebrows and questions. But he wasn't alone in flaunting a luxurious soak. Across Europe, the aristocracy competed in the quiet war of tubs. The Duchess of Parma had a marble basin large enough for two, allegedly designed with marital negotiations in mind. The Swedish ambassador once brought a portable tin bath lined with fur. And Josephine? She had a tub carved from a single block of pink granite. It took 17 workers to install it. She used it twice. You once visited a noble estate outside Versailles, where the bather could ring a bell mid-soak to summon musicians. A violinist would sit in the corridor, playing soft notes as the noble contemplated steam. Fringe fact. One baron insisted on having live doves released during every bath. This was, reportedly, for spiritual alignment. His guests described it as a bit much. Even Napoleon got in on the pageantry. He had his tub fitted with a small fold-out writing desk. That's right. You could dictate letters while half submerged in rose-scented suds. He'd compose notes to generals, correct drafts of speeches, and once even rewrote a treaty clause from beneath a foamy mustache of soap bubbles. "Clean mind, clean empire," he said once. No one was quite sure if he meant it or if it was just the lavender talking. But let's not pretend it was all glamour. Tubs were expensive, water was heavy, heating it required firewood, time, and no small risk of scorching your backside. The copper itself would groan and ping as it cooled, echoing like a moody cello in the dark. And privacy? Forget it. You'd often be surrounded by a flock of servants, some adjusting curtains, some pouring oils, others just awkwardly pretending not to stare. One British visitor once remarked, "In Paris, one bathes like a sovereign, surrounded, scented, and slightly watched." Of course, there were rules. The higher your rank, the less you were expected to actually wash yourself. Napoleon did scrub his own arms and chest, but left his back and feet to the valet. Josephine once had 4 attendants for a single bath. One to pour, one to scrub, one to hand her fruit, and one to write down spontaneous poetry if she was feeling lyrical. She rarely was. The tub had become a theater. During one imperial banquet, a guest admired the silver tub stationed near a side parlor. Is that art? He asked. No, someone replied. That's the Emperor's Tuesday. But the pièce de résistance was the bain de minuit midnight bathing. Napoleon sometimes requested a bath drawn late at night, after meetings, letters, and the usual dinner of bland meats and overcooked vegetables. The palace would go quiet. Candles were lit. The fire was stoked. And in the flicker of gold and shadow, he would soak. Not to clean, just to think. Because in the tub, he was no longer surrounded by ministers or maps. No enemy fire, no diplomatic blunders. Just warmth, steam, and the occasional creak of metal cooling behind him. One aide described it as the only hour he seemed truly human. Sometimes he'd speak aloud in the bath, not to anyone, just musings, observations. One night he reportedly muttered, "History will remember my battles, but not my feet." He was probably right. Fringe tidbit. The emperor had his bathtub blessed by a bishop. Not publicly, quietly. One priest, one vial of holy water, and a whispered hope that His Majesty may find peace even among soap bubbles. It didn't make the newspapers. After Napoleon's fall, his bathtubs were inventoried like everything else. His Tuileries tub was removed, stored, and eventually placed in a museum, next to a small, dignified plaque that does not mention the time he got stuck in it. But we'll get to that. Tonight, as you imagine reclining in your own imaginary imperial bath, let the water settle, let the steam rise. And remember, in the age of empires, it wasn't just swords or speeches that marked your greatness. Sometimes it was the tub you sat in the quiet confidence of a man who conquered Europe, then paused to moisturize. The battlefield is muddy, the sky is sulky with clouds, and you've just stepped out of your tent in nothing but a towel. Not for lack of options, but because today you are determined to have a bath. Welcome to the most awkward footnote in military history, the time Napoleon attempted a full-body soak within earshot of cannon fire. It's early December, somewhere near Austerlitz. You've been up since before dawn, discussing troop movements and grain shortages. Your generals are grumpy, your boots are damp, and your mood is somewhere between mildly volcanic and decisively soap-deprived. So you do what any empire-building genius would do in the middle of a military campaign. You demand a bath. Your aides look at one another, then at the frozen field, then back at you. But they don't question. Because when Napoleon wants hot water, Napoleon gets hot water. So they scrounge. A copper basin is pulled from a baggage cart. Water is boiled over 3 separate fires. Soldiers are ordered to form a privacy ring. A decorative rug is laid out to protect your feet from frostbite. Someone even lights a scented candle, though no one is quite sure why or where it came from. You step into the tub with the ceremonial gravity of a coronation. And that's when the argument begins. Not yours. You're soaking, but your generals. Oh, they're now engaged in a 3-way debate just 10 feet away. General Soult believes the soap should be rationed. Marshal Lannes argues that soap boosts morale. And Berthier, ever the tactician, says, His Majesty's bath is sacred, and so is his lather. You sit in silence, letting the steam rise. Eventually, you clear your throat. All 3 men freeze. Slowly, you extend your hand and ask, "Do we conquer with cleanliness or confusion, gentlemen?" Silence, then a quiet voice. "Cleanliness, sire." You nod. The soap stays. Historians still argue whether this battle actually occurred before Austerlitz, or whether the location was later embellished to add drama. Some claim it was during the Jena campaign. Others say it never happened at all, and was merely invented by an aide with a flair for theater.
but letters from soldiers confirm at least one field bath incident and several awkward glances. Because here's the problem. Even in victory, bath time logistics are a mess. First, the water. You need a lot of it. Hot, ideally. That requires fire, wood, and patience, none of which are in great supply in the middle of winter on a makeshift battlefield. The water is ladled in, bucket by bucket, and by the time it's full, half of it is already cooling into lukewarm mediocrity. Second, the soap. Yours is specially formulated with an almond oil blend that keeps your skin supple and smells faintly of ambition. But in the field, even the emperor's soap comes in a cloth-wrapped lump, tied with twine and kissed by frost. Once, a soldier mistook it for cheese and ate half before realizing his error. He later said it was surprisingly nutty. Third, the privacy.
You're surrounded by soldiers who, until this moment, hadn't seen running water in 3 weeks. They pretend not to look, but you feel the glances. One curious drummer boy sneaks a peek through the tent flap and is promptly assigned latrine duty for a month. Lesson learned. Still, you persist. Because the bath is not about luxury, it's about control. About showing that, even in chaos, you maintain your standards. If you can be clean here now in this muck, then you are truly untouchable. There's a famous fringe anecdote. After his bath, Napoleon emerged in full uniform, smelling like citrus and command, and delivered one of his briefest orders ever: advance. The troops, inspired and slightly confused, surged forward. Victory followed, probably unrelated. But the soap gets partial credit. Another less dignified tale suggests you once slipped while getting out of your bath and landed squarely on your dignity. Aides rushed in. You waved them off. Let the floor taste the weight of greatness, you reportedly muttered, face still pressed to the carpet. It may not have happened, but it should have. And yet, despite the chaos, field bathing became a Napoleon trademark. In Spain, you bathed in a wine barrel. In Italy, a wooden trough. In Prussia, a silver basin was used by the previous king. You adapted, you soaked, and your soldiers followed suit eventually. They started heating kettles, bartering for soap, even scheduling group scrubs before key battles. It was unofficial policy. Clean army, mean army. But not everyone approved. One Prussian general scoffed that Napoleon's troops were sissies with scented armpits. He later surrendered, possibly related. Then there's the letter. You once wrote to your brother Lucian, even mud must respect a man who knows how to bathe. It's unclear if you meant it literally or metaphorically. Probably both. Either way, Lucien never quite got the hang of it. His nickname at court became Le Piquant, the pungent. As for your enemies, they mocked your hygiene until they saw you win. Then they copied it. Russian officers began carrying cologne. Austrian field tents came equipped with portable wash basins. The British began importing French soap for tactical reasons. Cleanliness was no longer a feat, it was elite. And so you kept bathing, even in exile on Elba, and later St. Helena. You demanded your tub, same routine, same towels. One British guard once remarked, "The man has lost a continent, but never his lather." So the next time you imagine the emperor on the field, sword in hand, eyes ablaze, remember this: he probably smelled incredible. It's a quiet morning in Paris. The light filters through lace curtains, casting watery patterns on the parquet floor. A valet tiptoes into the imperial chamber, carrying a large porcelain bowl, not of fruit nor flowers, but used bath water. Yesterday's. Because in Napoleon's France, water didn't go to waste, it gets repurposed. Welcome to the curious economy of imperial bathwater. You sit on a velvet stool, robed in white, reading a draft of trade reforms with one hand while sipping barley coffee with the other. Behind you, two servants debate what to do with the contents of last night's soak. One suggests using it to clean boots, another mentions laundry, a third, with alarming confidence, says soup. You do not look up, but you do make a sound, a sharp little tisk, which means no, not soup. Ever. In the early 1800s, water was precious even in palaces. Hauling it takes time, money, and manpower. Heating it takes wood, patience, and a disregard for how many eyebrows are singed in the process. So naturally, every drop is counted, reused, and reassigned, especially the scented kind. Your bathwater, laced with rose oil, lavender, or neroli, is considered premium. After you finish bathing, it doesn't go down the drain. There is no drain. Instead, it's collected in buckets and rolled down the hall to its second life. Historians still argue whether Josephine actually used Napoleon's leftover bathwater to wash her silk petticoats. A few letters suggest she did. It keeps the fabric soft and is sent close. Others find the notion ridiculous. But the fact that it's possible says a lot about how water was valued. In less gilded homes, reused bathwater was part of daily life. First bath, the master. Second, the lady. Third, the children. Fourth, the dog. Fifth, the linens. Last, the floors. One unfortunate servant claimed her grandmother once washed lettuce in the 6th round. We were very clean, she said, but the salad had notes of sandalwood. At court, this practice became oddly ritualized. After your bath, a servant would note the fragrance and temperature. Depending on the oil content, it might be used to polish boots, rinse wigs, or more glamorously, fill foot baths for visiting ambassadors. A soak in His Majesty's essence, one Viennese diplomat joked. No one laughed. There's even a fringe tale from 1809 that after Napoleon's victory at Wagram, the general staff toasted him not with champagne, but with tiny cups of his post-battle bath water, likely apocryphal, but deliciously weird. More reliably, we know this. Napoleon hated the idea of waste. He was fussy about coins, candles, and especially consumables. His menus were sparse, his gifts calculated, and his bathwater accounted for. There are ledger books listing quantities, usage, and disposal routes for every chamber. One entry reads, Wednesday, 3 buckets, neroli, reserved for horses' legs. The steeds of Versailles, it seems, had excellent taste. You once interrupted a servant attempting to dump used water into the garden. What? You asked coldly. Does the soil know of lavender? The servant was reassigned. The rose bushes presumably never smelled the same again. But not all reuse was practical. Some was sentimental. Josephine, during their brief separations, sometimes requested a cloth soaked in her husband's bathwater. She would press it to her face before sleeping. Napoleon responded by sending her a scented scarf and a note. The water remembers what the skin forgets. Whether you find that romantic or unsettling depends on your tolerance for moist poetry. It wasn't just the court. Perfume makers in Paris began marketing soaps with labels like Imperial Lather or Napoleon's Night Soak. None were official, but people bought them. Some shops even claimed their oils were made with water from the same springs used in the emperor's bath. Probably untrue, definitely profitable. Even the laundry got special treatment. His undershirts were washed in lukewarm, lightly perfumed water, often bath leftovers, then air dried in rooms filled with citrus peels. Socks were rare. Napoleon famously disliked them. But the few he tolerated were also rinsed post-bath, never pre. Let the emperor's warmth bless the cloth, one laundress said. She later wrote a memoir. It sold surprisingly well, but things weren't always so fragrant. One day, a new servant tried to shortcut the reuse process. Instead of saving the bath water, he dumped it directly out of a window, onto a lower balcony, where a diplomat's wife was enjoying tea. There was shrieking, apologies, and a sternly worded note to the Ministry of Cleanliness. Yes, that was a real thing briefly. The servant vanished into administrative exile. The tea set reportedly retained the faint scent of lemon verbena for weeks. Over time, Napoleon's obsession with repurposing became part of court etiquette. Guests were expected to pretend they didn't notice when the same towel showed up twice. A spilled bowl of bath water was treated like a state secret. "Don't ask, don't sniff," became a whispered phrase among footmen. And yet, through it all, the emperor stayed consistent. Every bath was drawn fresh, every drop was noted, and every reuse, however strange, reminded the court of one thing. This was not just a man who ruled armies, he ruled a Roma. So tonight, if your mind wanders as you soak in your own warm water, remember the quiet dignity of the second pour, the soft shimmer of oils, reborn as polish, the faint memory of a ruler who believed that no drop of luxury should go to waste, even if that meant his bathwater ended up cleaning someone else's boots. There's a knock at the chamber door, soft, deliberate, and unmistakably diplomatic. You're in your bath, of course. Steam curls gently upward, and your elbows rest on the padded edge of the copper tub. A valet whispers through the screen, "Your Majesty, the Prussian ambassador has arrived." You sigh. Not because you dislike Prussians, but because the water is exactly the right temperature, and you were hoping for 20 more minutes of uninterrupted lavender-scented solitude. Too bad. Welcome to one of the more slippery arts of empire, bathtime diplomacy. In Napoleon's court, few things were ever truly private. Not meals, not conversations, and certainly not baths. If you think the emperor left his strategies at the map table, you'd be mistaken. Some of his boldest moves happened in, around, or immediately adjacent to a bathtub. Take today, for example. The ambassador has arrived early. His carriage is still steaming in the courtyard. His wig is slightly crooked. He's prepared with notes, rehearsed pleasantries, and a modest proposal for trade adjustments. What he hasn't prepared for is being invited to wait in the bathing chamber. Yes, the actual bathing chamber. Historians still argue whether Napoleon did this as a calculated power move or out of pure impatience. Some say he liked testing a diplomat's composure. Others claim he simply believed in multitasking. Either way, it happened more than once. You rise slightly in the tub, the water rippling around you like a lazy moat. A screen is drawn to preserve modesty, barely. The ambassador bows, uncertain whether to address you or the folded towel on the nearby bench. "Speak," you say, reaching for a cloth. And he does, awkwardly. At first, but then he relaxes, the air is warm, the scent is calming. There's a strange intimacy in addressing a ruler who is partially submerged and completely unarmored. Within minutes, he's offering concessions he didn't plan to give. You nod occasionally, squeezing water from a sponge, as if wringing out secrets. Fringe fact. The emperor is still unsettled. He waits, watching, uncertain whether to respond. Then he says, "Your Majesty, the Prussian ambassador has arrived." You sigh. Not because you dislike Prussians, but because the water is exactly the right temperature, and you were hoping for 20 more minutes of uninterrupted lavender-scented solitude. One Danish envoy reportedly confessed a treaty clause by accident, while distracted by the echoing drip of water and the surreal setting. "I thought it was a dream," he later admitted. "Or a trap. Or both." Josephine, of course, had her own style of bath-bound diplomacy. She never received visitors in the bath, but she certainly timed her soaks to coincide with the arrival of specific guests. A delay here, a fragrance there, a flutter of silk and damp hair as she finally appeared. "Forgive me," she'd say, cheeks flushed. "The roses wouldn't leave the water." One Swedish count was so mesmerized by her scent that he forgot his prepared speech entirely and just complimented the curtains for 15 minutes. She smiled. Napoleon signed the agreement later that evening. It wasn't all passive charm, though. Napoleon once summoned a general during his bath to reprimand him. Not after, not before, during. The general arrived, saluted, and was forced to stand at attention while Napoleon calmly lathered his arms. "You marched 3 days too slow," he said, splashing water casually. "Your hesitation cost us a ridge." "Sire," the general said, eyes fixed straight ahead, "I thought it was a strategic delay." Napoleon held up a sponge. "This," he said, "is a delay. What you did was doubt." The general was dismissed. The sponge, presumably, was victorious. There's a psychological element to all this. Baths disarm people. The soft lighting, the warm air, the gentle sound of splashing. It's not where your mind expects power to live. But Napoleon knew that. He used that. The bath was his stage. Not just for cleanliness, but command. Servants, too, learned the rhythm. If a negotiation wasn't going well, the valet might accidentally deliver a tray of perfumed oils, disrupting the conversation just long enough for Napoleon to regroup. If a visitor seemed too comfortable, a sudden draft might be introduced by shifting a curtain. Even the temperature of the water was hotter for close allies. Cooler for rivals was part of the game. Then there were the letters. Napoleon often dictated correspondence from the tub. Not brief notes, full letters. Military, romantic, and administrative. His secretaries would sit just outside the screen, quill poised, trying to ignore the sound of sloshing as they transcribed declarations of war and declarations of love in the same breath. One such letter to Josephine begins, "I write from a basin of warmth where your absence chills the steam." She was said to have fainted upon reading it, possibly from emotion, possibly from melodrama. Later, on Elba, stripped of his empire but not his habits, Napoleon continued the practice. There are reports of him inviting British officers to sit and speak while he bathed in a stone basin overlooking the sea. "Even fallen," he told one visitor, "I remain afloat." A bit much, certainly, but no one forgot it. Even today, historians analyze these episodes like psychological case studies. Was it vulnerability masked as strength, strength masquerading as domesticity, or just a very efficient use of time? One scholar dryly observed, Napoleon bathed with more strategy than most kings ruled. But perhaps the most surreal incident came near the end of his reign. A final peace envoy arrived at the palace under tense circumstances. Napoleon was already in the bath, refusing apparently to be interrupted. But rather than delay the meeting, he simply said, "Bring him in." The ambassador entered, bowed low, and began his speech. At some point, Napoleon, still in the tub, interrupted him with a single word, "No." The ambassador blinked. "Sire, you haven't heard the terms." "I don't need to," Napoleon said, eyes half-lidded behind steam. "If you came while I bathed, your nation already wants peace more than I do." The envoy bowed again. The meeting was over. The bath was not. So tonight, as you drift deeper into your own warmth, consider this. Power isn't always loud. Sometimes it floats on steam, hides behind a towel, and says more with a pause than with a parade. In Napoleon's world, even a bath could win a war, or at least end one. You're lying back in your tub again because, of course, you are, and something's not quite right. The water's fine, the oils are fragrant, the towels are warm, but your stomach is gurgling like a discontented cannon. Here begins a chapter rarely found in the official histories. Napoleon's unfortunate, persistent, and occasionally dramatic stomach issues, and the bizarre medical soaks prescribed to soothe them. To be fair, you've never been particularly known for your digestion. Even in your youth, rich food made you sluggish, spices unsettled you, and once after an especially heavy Corsican feast, you allegedly spent 12 hours on a balcony, glaring at the horizon and whispering threats to a roasted goat. But as you grow older and more powerful, your body grows more temperamental. So you turn to your doctors. And they, being of their time, offer remedies that are somehow both ambitious and questionable. Enter the medical soak. Today's prescription: a mustard poultice for the feet and a wine-spiked foot bath. Why wine? Because it stimulates circulation, apparently. Why the feet? Because some physicians decided your toes were somehow connected to your stomach. You stare at your bare ankles in the bath and wonder whether your empire is in better shape than your intestines. Historians still argue whether these soaks had any real medical effect or were simply elaborate placebos with a great aroma. But what we do know is that Napoleon submitted to them with surprising regularity. Lavender for calm, eucalyptus for breathing, chamomile for internal harmony. One fringe account even claims that during a siege, Napoleon paused a strategy session to soak his feet in rosewater while dictating an attack plan. The general beside him asked if the scent was distracting. Napoleon replied no, but defeat would be. At times, your treatments went beyond the tub. There were mustard plasters applied to your chest, burning but invigorating, small leechings near your belly, allegedly for balancing the bile, and digestive teas that smelled like regret. You didn't care for most of it, but you followed instructions with military precision. If my body rebels, you once told a valet, then we fight it like we fight Austria. And then, of course, there was the wine, not for drinking, not this time, for soaking. One doctor insisted that mixing Burgundy with bathwater helped warm the liver and thin the blood. You complied but grumbled. I prefer to command the wine, not the other way around. After one such soak, Josephine joked, "You smelled like a very expensive mistake." Still, the ritual calmed you. You'd soak, towel off slowly, then sit with a warmed blanket around your shoulders, sipping weak chamomile while listening to music through a half-closed door. No strategy, no letters. Just the soft crackle of fire and the delicate silence of someone important pretending not to feel unwell. Of course, your stomach was more than a medical matter. It became a myth. Whispers began that Napoleon's bellyache dictated troop movements, that his indigestion predicted the weather. One aide claimed he could judge the outcome of a council session based on how many biscuits you refused at breakfast. 2 biscuits, prepare for war. No biscuits, stay home. The truth was simpler. You were uncomfortable, and baths made it better. So the doctors leaned in. They introduced new blends: rosemary for clarity, mint for motion, bitter orange for psychic digestion. They filled the bath like a cauldron. You floated in it like a brooding souffle. On long campaigns, when no tub was available, you'd settle for foot baths in barrels. You once kicked over a hot water bucket by accident and nearly scalded a general. You apologized eventually. The emperor regrets, you said, that his toe declared war. Josephine, to her credit, took all this in stride. She had her own remedies, steamed cloths, herb satchels tucked in corsets, strange tinctures from old Creole recipes. She insisted on a shared bath once, claiming the heat would align your humors. You agreed, though you insisted on separate towels. We are united, you said, but not in drying. But over time, the baths became less about medicine and more about escape. On difficult days, you disappear into the steam for hours. The staff learned not to knock. The generals learned to wait. One minister reportedly stood outside your chamber for 3 hours, then sent a note. Sire, I beg you to emerge, if not for France, then for your skin. Even on Elba, you maintain the ritual. Though the tub was smaller, the oils were local, and the heat never quite reached the toes, it was still sacred, still yours. Later, on St. Helena, the treatments continued but with a grimmer tone. The stomach pain worsened. The doctors disagreed. One prescribed warm milk baths, another suggested clay compresses. A third simply shrugged. You endured it all. But the baths now carried a note of morning warmth without ease, ritual without relief. One evening, while being lowered into the tub by 2 attendants, you reportedly whispered, "If I must die, let it be clean." They thought it was a joke. You didn't laugh. And yet, the dignity remained. Even pruny, even pale, even sick, you were Napoleon. You held your chin high, even when the waterline crept to your ears. You dictated one final letter from the bath. It began, "To be warm, to be still, to be heard." No one's quite sure who it was for. Tonight, as you relax beneath your own ceiling, with no empire to govern and no valet at your side, consider the quiet power of a soak, of letting warmth rise over worry, of steam hiding the cracks. Because even emperors need soft water, quiet music, and something kind for the stomach. The bath is quiet. The steam is gentle. The water is perfectly warm. You're alone in your copper tub, except, of course, for the sound of your own increasingly annoyed breathing. Because you, Emperor of the French, conqueror of Europe, and occasional dictator of dressing gowns, are stuck. Truly, embarrassingly, ridiculously stuck. Tonight is meant to be ordinary. A soak to calm your nerves after a frustrating cabinet meeting. One in which 2 ministers argued over grain tariffs, and one sneezed so hard his wig fell into the soup. You excused yourself early, grumbling that your head ached and that only bergamot-scented water could fix what politics had undone. The tub is filled. The candles are lit. The valets are dismissed for now. You slide in. And for a few blessed minutes, it's bliss. Until it isn't. At some point, between the sponge and the sigh, you attempt to shift your position, and you don't move. At first, you think it's the towel bunched beneath you. Then, perhaps a suction of skin to copper. You twist, you adjust, you push with your elbows. Nothing. You are, in the most literal and undignified way, wedged. Historians still argue whether this incident occurred in 1811 or 1813, whether it was in the Tuileries or Fontainebleau, whether it lasted 1 hour or 3. But multiple personal journals written by valets, chambermaids, and one smug footman agree on 3 key facts. Napoleon was alone. He was undressed. He could not get out of the tub. At first you wait. Surely the effect will pass. You read a nearby dossier. You hum. You attempt a polite scoot. The sound it makes is undignified. A kind of squelch sigh, like a wet boot being removed by an indecisive butler. You call softly, "Constant?" No answer. You call again, louder, "Constant?" Still nothing. Where's that man? Elsewhere in the palace, Constant is in the linen room, folding napkins and making just enough noise to not hear anything. Historians suspect he did hear your cries, but chose not to respond immediately. Why? Well, there are theories. One theory claims he feared interrupting you. Another suggests a rival servant bribed him to delay, possibly Marshal Ney, who had recently been scolded in front of the council and may have welcomed a little imperial embarrassment. A fringe there, your undocumented but too delicious to ignore, claims a small group of servants had taken bets on when you'd finally call for help during bath time. And tonight, you were ahead of schedule. Back in the tub, you're weighing your options. Option 1, wait. Perhaps the water will cool, your skin will dry, and friction will release you. Option 2, yell louder, summoning not just your valet, but potentially half the palace. Option 3, try to roll out of the tub and accept whatever bruises or floor burns come with it. You go with option 1 for now. Time passes. The water begins to cool. You shift again, trying to twist one leg out. You almost make it until your knee hits the rim and you slide back down with a slosh and a soft grunt of betrayal. You imagine the headlines. Emperor humbled by bathtub. Napoleon defeated by soap. A sudsy coup in the palace. Eventually you sigh, loudly, then groan. Then with reluctant dignity, you ring the bell. 5 minutes later, the door creaks open. It's Constant. Eyes carefully averted, expression perfectly neutral. He approaches slowly, as if you might mistake him for a particularly helpful ghost. "Sire," he says gently, "shall I assist?" There's a pause, a long one. "Yes," you say, "and bring a second towel." What follows is part ballet, part engineering. Towels are placed strategically, water is ladled out, your arms are braced against the tub walls, and finally, with a heave, a squelch, and a distinctly undignified poe, you are free. Soaked, shivering, but free. You say nothing. Constant says nothing. The only sound is the soft rustle of linen and the faint hiss of a dying candle. You dress in silence. You sit by the fire. A glass of wine is brought. You stare into the flames and mutter, "We shall replace that tub." The tub is not replaced, but it is quietly relocated. Rumors have been swirling for weeks. A few ministers chuckle behind their gloves. Josephine hears the story and sends you a soap shaped like a life raft. You are not amused. Later, in his memoirs, Constant will refer to the night only as the Copper Incident. And while the world will remember your campaigns, your battles, your treaties, the palace staff will always remember the evening the emperor got pruny and slightly panicked in his own bath. And really, who could blame you? After all, even the greatest among us are only one poorly timed movement away from an awkward silence and a cold towel. So tonight, as you lower yourself into your own bath, remember this: don't get cocky. Tubs have long memories, and copper never forgets. The next morning, there's a strange tension in the air, one that smells faintly of bergamot, embarrassment, and conspiratorial silence. You, the emperor? rise earlier than usual, not because of urgent state matters, but because last night's incident still clings to your dignity like a damp towel. You dress in silence. You do not look at the tub, and you most certainly do not ask for a bath, but someone else does. Enter the palace gossip chain quicker than any messenger, more persistent than any drumbeat of war. By breakfast, 3 valets, 2 chambermaids, and a parrot belonging to Josephine's cousin have all overheard that something happened in the bathing chamber. The phrase, His Majesty became temporarily seated, is whispered with curious reverence. And then there's the mystery of the missing valet. Constant is present, of course, dutiful, expressionless, folding napkins and offering lemon slices with tea. But something in his manner is too perfect. He's avoiding your gaze with the precision of a man who knows a story he's not supposed to know. You begin to wonder, did he really not hear you at first, or was he waiting? Historians still argue this point. Some believe Constant deliberately delayed his return, that he heard the splash, the faint echo of Constant from behind the gilded door, and chose to pretend it was a breeze or a ghost. Why? Jealousy, maybe. Exhaustion, probably. But there's one particularly juicy theory. It involves Marshal Ney. Now, Ney is no stranger to drama. Brave in battle, hot-tempered in meetings, and not particularly fond of being corrected in public. Just 2 weeks prior, you chastised him sharply over troop movements loudly and in front of others. His ears turned red. His mustache twitched. He said nothing, but something simmered. And now, perhaps coincidentally, Constant receives a gift. A silver coin. Old, rare Prussian. No note. Just a pouch on his nightstand. A token of appreciation from someone. Someone who may or may not have whispered, "Take your time tonight." Is this true? No one can say. But the servant who cleaned the bathing chamber that morning found not 1, not 2, but 3 unused towels still folded neatly beside the tub, meaning no one had entered for quite some time. Suspicious. Meanwhile, other servants are beginning to ask questions. A young footman corners a maid. Why did His Majesty skip his usual cologne this morning? He's thinking, she replies, about campaigns. Number about tubs. Even Josephine hears the whispers. She sends a cryptic note from her apartments, delicately scented with a perfume called Rescue. The note reads simply, "You always rise stronger after being submerged." You do not reply. Later that day, during a quiet moment in the salon, you spot Marshal Ney. He bows, you nod. But something in his smirk lingers a beat too long. Not enough to accuse, just enough to suspect. Your mind begins to spiral. What if this were a coordinated joke? A quiet act of rebellion? Has your bathtub become a symbol of your softening? Are ministers whispering, "The lion who once roared across Europe now mews for towels"? So you act. That evening, you summon the palace steward. "Reassign the bathing schedule," you say. "Limit access, 1 valet only. Trusted." You pause, then add, "And send the copper tub to the storeroom." The steward nods. He dares not ask why. Later, you stroll the halls, pretending not to listen as laughter drifts from behind doors. Someone is retelling a tale involving a splash, a pause, and a lesson in leverage. You clench your jaw, but you also smile, slightly, because deep down, even you see the humor in it. You are the master of strategy, the orchestrator of conquests, momentarily defeated by a humble bathtub, and possibly an unpaid servant bribe. If you were a lesser man, it would sting. But as Napoleon, it simply becomes part of your legend. and legends evolve. Soon, your court adopts a new phrase, to sit with strength. It's whispered by servants as code for, be careful what you say, the emperor might be nearby. But to those in the know, it's a wink. A subtle nod to the night when you sat, rather involuntarily, for 3 solid hours. A fringe poem is even composed by a chamber flautist with too much free time. The emperor in water braced, in the copper throne was gently cased. 3 hours long he pondered fate, and toweled off both wrath and weight. It never sees official publication, but someone pins it inside a linen closet, where it hangs, smudged and yellowed for years. And what of Constant? He's never punished, never directly accused, but you assign him new duties, closer, more demanding, more visible, no more convenient folding escapes or suspicious absences. He doesn't complain. He only bows and refills the new porcelain tub with perfectly measured silence. As for you, you continue bathing, of course. You love it too much to quit. But you do so now with a heightened sense of awareness. You test the water. You shift your weight with care. And you never, ever get in without a towel draped precisely beneath you, because once was enough. And the memory of stillness, of being alone, immobile, noble, and naked, lingers in the copper like a ghost. Tonight, as your own bath water cools around your ankles, remember, greatness isn't about never slipping. It's about what you do after you've gotten stuck. And whether your servant's coin purse now carries the faintest jingle of conspiracy. By now, the bath has become more than a habit. It's a language, a ritual, a quiet, steamy fortress against the daily battering of empire. But where there is ritual, there is costume. And where there is a costume, well, there is comedy. Let's talk about what Napoleon wore to bathe. Because no, it wasn't anything. Not exactly. You begin with a robe, not the kind you or I might imagine, but a finely woven thing of silk, trimmed in gold thread and monogrammed with a modest N that somehow took up half the back. It wasn't for bathing, it was for entering the room, your pre-soak garment, if you will. A valet carries it on a long rod, like it's sacred linen. You slip into it like a general donning his armor. The room is already warmed, the water waiting, the candles flickering as though they too await your command. Then, the disrobing. It's not swift, it's ceremonial. One servant removes the slippers, another unties the sash. A third waits to collect the robe, folding it like an heirloom blanket. And beneath it, the bathing attire. Now, this varies by year, by mood, by political climate even. Sometimes it's a cotton tunic, thin, white, clinging damply the moment it touches the bath. Sometimes it's nothing but linen drawers. And on particularly modest days, a kind of long bathing shirt that falls to the knees and looks suspiciously like something a 15th century monk might wear during laundry hour. Historians still debate why Napoleon often wore clothing into the bath at all. Modesty? Superstition? A belief that bare skin absorbs too much scent. One theory claims he feared surprise interruptions and wanted to preserve at least a scrap of dignity in case of emergencies. Another suggests he simply disliked the feeling of wet porcelain on bare thighs. There's also the wig myth. For years, people believed Napoleon wore a wig, particularly during formal occasions. But no, he was famously proud of his own dark hair, though he powdered it lightly. Post-bath, he had an entire ritual for drying and brushing it. First, a warm towel, then scented oil, then the brushing involved 18 strokes precisely. He once snapped at a valet who stopped at 15. His bathing slippers were custom made, soft leather lined with sheepskin. They had tiny bees embroidered near the toes. One of them squeaked slightly on the tile, and you insisted it be replaced. An emperor does not squeak, you said. A line that would be carved jokingly into the underside of a serving tray by a rebellious steward. Let's not forget the towels. So many towels. You had towels for drying hands, towels for wrapping the head, towels designated solely for feet, and a few smaller squares described cryptically in laundry logs as miscellaneous cloths for delicate areas. One British visitor marveled at the array, writing, "Never has drying one's self looked more like preparing for war." And then there was the post-bath outfit. This was not your daily uniform yet. This was the interlude ensemble. It usually involved a fresh linen undershirt, a soft robe, embroidered again, and slippers. You'd sit by the fire, sipping water or thin wine, dictating notes, or staring at maps while still glowing from the bath. Sometimes, Josephine would enter at this stage. She rarely joined the bath itself. It was too warm, she said, too indulgent, but she loved the after. She'd touch your damp hair, wrinkle her nose at the cologne. "Too lemony today," she might whisper, and sit beside you, one stockinged foot propped up on the rug, one fringe detail from a chambermaid's memoir. Josephine once playfully flicked bath water at Napoleon during this post-soak moment. He responded by dabbing her nose with a scented towel and saying, "Madame, this is treason of the moist variety." She laughed so hard she fell off the chaise. But the bathing attire was about more than comfort. It was armor. During war, political backstabbing, international alliances, and the weight of an empire, this controlled, scented, towel-layered world was yours. No swords, no treaties, just folds of fabric and predictable rituals. Even your enemies mocked it. One Austrian cartoon depicted you as a child in a tub, surrounded by soldiers scrubbing your back while maps of Europe floated like rubber ducks. You found it hilarious, ordered a copy, framed it in the study. In later years, as illness crept in, your attire grew looser. Robes got heavier. Layers multiplied. You stayed in the bath longer. You wore gloves to the water. Once some say to keep your fingers from wrinkling. Others say because you feared being seen as too human. One British officer post-exile remarked, "For all his fire and fury, Napoleon always dressed like a man trying not to catch a chill." And maybe that's the truth of it. Beneath the power, beneath the boots and sashes and scepters, you were cold sometimes, tired, mortal. And bathing lets you pretend otherwise. So tonight, as you fold your towel and slip into your own robe, perhaps not embroidered, perhaps not monogrammed, consider the humble elegance of being clean, wrapped, and quiet, of dressing not to impress, but to restore. Because sometimes even emperors need pajamas that fit just right. The year is 1810, and France, like your patience, is running dry. It hasn't rained properly in weeks. The fountains in Paris sputter. The well at Malmaison tastes faintly of iron. And for the first time in recent memory, the palace stewards begin to whisper the unthinkable. There may not be enough water for the emperor's bath. This is the great water crisis of 1810, mostly forgotten by textbooks, but whispered in court with the same gravity as a military defeat. And for a man who takes at least one scented bath per day, this is not just an inconvenience, it is war. You're informed of the shortage while sitting for breakfast, over a dry melon slice and slightly burnt toast. A valet coughs gently, unfolds a small scroll, and announces, "Due to the drought, Your Majesty's bath may be delayed or reduced." You stare. "Reduced?" He nods. "By how much?" "15%, sire." You don't blink. 15%? Of the water? Of the heat? Of the scented oils? All of the above. This is unacceptable. You summon your ministers. You summon your engineers. You summon your most creative valet. "Solve this," you say, "or find me a lake." One proposes transporting water from the Loire. Another suggests tapping the aqueducts under the old Roman ruins. A third timidly offers, "Perhaps a sponge bath, sire?" He is promptly reassigned to stable duty. The bath must continue, but it must adapt. And thus begins a new era, the era of scented oils. Josephine is the first to suggest it, perhaps because she has already been using them for years. "A few drops," she says, "in warm cloth, and you glow for hours." You wrinkle your nose. "That's not bathing," you say. "That's marinating." Still, you try it. A warm cloth, a fine oil of rosemary and bitter orange, gentle dabbing. It's acceptable. Not the immersive soak you prefer, but it does leave you with the comforting illusion of cleanliness. And the scent, you admit privately, lingers nicely in your sleeves. The court follows suit. Soon, everyone is dabbing. Ministers arrive at meetings with glistening foreheads. Generals smell faintly of rosewood. One officer over-applies and is politely asked to leave a council session due to excessive floral disruption. A new etiquette is born. 3 dabs maximum. Any more, and it's considered a declaration of olfactory aggression. Servants begin rationing bathwater. Used water is cataloged, weighed, and stored in clay urns for reuse. Some of it is sold under the table to perfumers. One daring butler bottles a batch labeled L'essence de Napoleon and makes a small fortune before being discovered and reassigned to prune duty in the imperial orchard. And still, the drought deepens. The riverbanks crack. Fish flee. A footman is caught stealing water from a decorative bird bath. Desperate times. Even the royal ducks begin looking suspiciously clean. Napoleon remains composed outwardly. But the rituals shift. Your tub is filled only halfway now. You sit knees up, reading military reports while your toes stick out like oddly important radishes. You begin skipping days. The towels seem thinner. The bath oils feel less imperial. One night you confess to Josephine, "I miss the steam." She places a damp cloth on your brow. "You miss your throne," she says. You smile just barely. Historians still debate whether this drought had any direct impact on foreign policy. But there are notes in the archives suggesting a canceled ball, a postponed summit, and one unusually curt letter to the King of Bavaria coinciding with a bathless week. Mood-driven diplomacy, one scholar calls it. There's even a curious incident involving the Russian ambassador. He arrives during the height of the water crisis expecting a private audience. Instead, he finds the emperor pacing, wrapped in a robe, hair uncombed, and distinctly dry. Napoleon offers him no chair, no wine, no cordial greeting. Just a single sentence. "You chose the wrong week to visit a clean man." The ambassador returns to Moscow within a fortnight. Eventually the rains come. The fountains gurgle back to life. The ponds refill. A rainbow is spotted over the Seine. And someone plays a small, triumphant tune on a court flute. You order the copper tub returned to its usual place. A fresh batch of bergamot oil is uncorked. You bathe for over an hour. And afterward, as you sit by the fire in your post-bathrobe, Josephine brings you a small envelope. inside, a single pressed lavender blossom, saved from the dry weeks. She says nothing, neither do you. But that night the palace breathed easier. The court writes nothing official about this crisis. No documents, no proclamations. But in quiet corners, among linens and ladles, they speak of the year the tubs ran low, the year of half baths and fragrant cloths, the year the emperor still reigned, but with slightly less steam. And you remember? Not just the inconvenience, but the patience, the restraint, the knowledge that power isn't just about what you command, but how you endure when denied it. So tonight, as you listen to the gentle drip of your faucet, think of Napoleon, knees to chest, floating in half a tub, still smelling of citrus and empire. The tub is full again. The drought is over. The lavender is back. And the steam, oh, the steam, is rolling across the marble floor like a soft, perfumed fog of victory. But today's bath is different, because today, the court has prepared something special, a demonstration, a public-ish, ceremonial example of how to bathe like an emperor. You didn't request it, but someone, probably Talleyrand, suggested it might boost morale. Show the people, he said, that their leader is not only strong, but splendidly scrubbed. You agreed, reluctantly. And now you're sitting behind a gilded screen while 20 high-ranking courtiers, ambassadors, and a few terribly nervous servants await a lesson in imperial hygiene protocol. Let us walk through it step by step. Step 1, the room inspection. Before a drop of water is poured, the chamber is examined. Temperature, warm but not stifling. Candles, beeswax only. Fragrance, balanced, not too floral, not too sharp. And most importantly, ducks. Yes, ducks. A fringe but enduring detail. Ever since an unfortunate childhood incident involving a toad in a bucket, Napoleon insists that every bath be duck-checked. It's not that he fears them, he simply dislikes surprises. So, a valet peeks beneath the tub and knocks thrice. No ducks, sire, he says. Good. Proceed. Step 2, the water composition. This isn't mere hot water. This is a brew. A carefully measured mixture of spring water, bergamot essence, rose petal reduction, and 2 drops of rosemary oil, no more. Last week someone added 3. You smelled like a kitchen garden for hours. The water is tested with a silver ladle. If it steams gently and doesn't fog your monocle, it passes. Step 3, the towel audit. There are 12 towels. Each has a purpose. Each has a name. Le visage, for the face, le cou, for the neck, les mains, for the hands, le trône, for, well, we'll leave that to the imagination, la retraite, for post-bathrobe coverage. The rest are backups, foot wraps, and for unexpected visitors. A good emperor is never caught unwrapped. Step 4, the entry. You don't step into the tub. You are lowered slowly by 2 trained valets. There's a rhythm. Left foot. Pause, right foot. Inhale, sit. All while maintaining regal posture and the faint expression of someone contemplating both the fate of Europe and a mildly undercooked croissant. As you descend, the assembled guests try not to gawk. One Prussian whispers, "It's like a ballet of cleanliness." Another faints quietly and is dragged away. Step 5. The silence once seated, the room goes still. You soak, you think, you glance at the ceiling and murmur something profound. Last week it was, "Time dissolves like soap in warm water." Someone wrote it down. It's now engraved on a wash basin at the Ministry of Agriculture. No one knows why. Step 6. The sponge presentation. A valet approaches with your sponge. It is not ordinary. It was harvested from a specific reef near Corsica, your birthplace. You insisted on them after discovering, early on, that inferior sponges scratch the soul. No one questioned it. The sponge is offered, bowed over like a crown. You nod once, take it, and begin your slow, deliberate regimen. Step 7. The non-negotiable bubble moment. This is private, but not secret. At some point during the soak, you must allow for a few bubbles to form, to swirl, and to vanish. It's symbolic, ephemeral. A reminder that power, like foam, rises and vanishes. Also, it amuses you? One courtier once burst into tears watching this moment. He later said he saw the destiny of France in 3 delicate spirals. Possibly too much sherry. Step 8. The drying process. No rubbing, no wringing, only patting. The towels are pressed beforehand between 2 warmed bricks and folded to ensure no corner is reused twice. You dislike repetition. As each limb is dried, a footman recites the names of famous rivers. Not aloud, but in his mind. It's an old superstition for good fortune. One servant once forgot and muttered Danube under his breath. You forgave him. He wept openly. Step 9. The post-bath robe. Not just any robe, the robe. Ivory white, lined with blue silk, scented with a mist of fig water, and stitched with bees along the hem. You once claimed wearing it made you feel like a clean storm cloud, whatever that means. You wrap it slowly, deliberately, a ballet of sleeves and chin lifts. Then you nod, signaling the close of the ritual. Step 10. The exit. You do not stride. You glide. Slippers are placed precisely where your feet will land. The chamber door opens before your breath even changes. And just before you vanish, you turn to the room and say, "Gentlemen, that is how France bathes." The applause is silent but thunderous. That night, courtiers wrote letters. Diplomats attempt to recreate the steps in hotel bathtubs. A German prince orders a copper basin embossed with a bee. One duchess hires a bathing choreographer. The ripple effect has begun. You, meanwhile, sleep soundly, scented, satisfied, sovereign. Because power may be about land and letters, but legacy, that lives in the steam, the ritual, and the perfectly folded towel. It's late. The fire has burned low. The palace halls are quiet except for the creak of distant floorboards and the muffled shuffle of slippers on waxed wood. But in your private chamber, you are wide awake, standing barefoot beside a trunk that looks far too luxurious for a battlefield. Because tonight you're going to need it. It's time to pack the traveling bath. Yes, the empire is on the move again. Troops must be rallied, treaties must be signed, and you, Napoleon, must remain scented, soaked, and strategically clean. Which means one thing, the most important luggage of all must be prepared. Let's open it. The trunk is divided into compartments, like a jewel box. One holds collapsible copper panels, another a folding frame. There's a tray for soaps, each labeled by day, a row of crystal vials for oils, a stack of linen towels pressed to military precision and tucked into a velvet sleeve, a monogrammed sponge you've had since Austerlitz. This isn't luxury, it's logistics. Historians still debate whether Napoleon invented the concept of the portable bath or simply refined it to an art form. What's known for certain, no matter where you went from the icy plains of Poland to the dusty hills of Spain, your bath came with you. In fact, during the 1806 campaign in Prussia, your engineers constructed a miniature mobile tent just for bathing. Canvas walls, a fire pit to heat water, and a small table for tea and strategy. When enemy scouts stumbled across it days later, they mistook it for an officer's quarters. One of them reportedly said, "I've never seen a battlefield smell like jasmine." But let's return to the packing. You instruct your valet. Don't forget the cedar wood oil. Double wrap the sponge this time. Last trip, it absorbed the smell of pickled fish from someone else's trunk. And bring the red towel, the good one. The one with the stitched bee near the corner. It brings luck. The valet nods. He's heard this before. Every trip is a ritual. The tub must be positioned near a south-facing window if possible. The water must be heated in copper kettles, not iron. And if crossing rivers, the soap must be packed separately to avoid absorbing foreign water energy. Yes, that's a thing, at least in your mind. There's a fringe account from an aide-de-camp in Italy. You refused to bathe for 3 days because the water tasted of Venetian suspicion. No one knew what that meant, but the staff scrambled to find a spring that did not offend imperial sensibilities. Josephine once traveled with you and found the mobile bathing unit both fascinating and completely ridiculous. "Do you really need 3 oils and a curtain?" she asked. "Do you need 5 hats and a bird?" You replied. Point taken. In some campaigns, you bathed more often than you slept. Soldiers joked that you were powered by soap and oranges. One sergeant wrote, "He returns from the tub more dangerous than from the war tent." There's a particular moment near Wagram when the bath becomes more than a comfort. You receive grim reports. Allies stalling, supplies delayed, morale low. You soak in silence for 40 minutes. Then mid-bath, you summon your secretary. Dripping wrapped in a towel, you dictate an order that turns the tide. It begins. The cold weakens the body, but steam sharpens the mind. You win the next battle. The British, meanwhile, mock your routines. Newspapers print cartoons of you sitting in bubbles while your generals toil. You have one framed. You love it. "If they fear my sword," you say, "they will surely fear my sword." In truth, the bath is more than indulgence. It's a reset, a thinking chamber. You've made decisions naked that others wouldn't dare make clothed. Borders moved while your fingers wrinkled. Armies were shaped as water steamed your knees. Your traveling tub has seen more of Europe than most monarchs. It's bathed in Austrian forests, Polish plains, Iberian fortresses. Even in Egypt, where water was scarce, your bath was drawn using boiled river water and cooled with cloth fans. A camel once stuck its head in during a rinse. You didn't flinch. "Let him observe greatness," you said. You weren't always so composed, though. Once, during a lightning storm in the Bavarian Alps, your tent shook. The bath water sloshed. You leapt up, slipped on the soap, and cursed every cloud from here to Lisbon. The valet tried not to laugh. He failed. You reassigned him to better boots duty. He thanked you. Despite everything, the bath never failed you. It kept you warm after cold marches. It hid your coughs from your men. It scented your letters with quiet strength. And tonight, as you stand before the packed trunk, every sponge tucked, every oil sealed, you feel ready. Outside, the horses snort. The carriages creak. Europe waits. You close the lid. The trunk locks with a soft click. Tomorrow you ride. But tonight, one final soak. You lower yourself into the familiar warmth and exhale. The road will be long. The nights will be cold. But the tub will follow. Because where Napoleon goes, the bath must go too. The sound of waves is different on an island, slower, more reflective, the kind of sound that doesn't just wash over you, it waits, listens, and then folds back into itself. You're in exile now. First on Elba, later St. Helena. The armies are gone. The ministers are silent. The treaties are signed without you. But the bath, still here. The tub has followed you across seas and empires, across thrones and thunder. Even now, stripped of your court, your rank, and your velvet-trimmed excuses, the bathing ritual remains perhaps the last remnant of power that no treaty could confiscate. Let's start with Elba. Your new home is small. The ceilings are too low. The staff are too chatty. But you're determined to maintain some dignity. And so, the copper tub is shipped in discreetly, then hauled up a hill by a mule with the temperament of a retired artillery officer. Your first bath on Elba is oddly triumphant. The towels are stiff. The oil smells like old lemons. But you sit in the warmth and close your eyes. You're not defeated, not really. You're reorganizing. At least that's what you tell yourself. A local artisan carves a new soap dish from olive wood. He presents it nervously. You thank him with a nod, then ask him to shave down the corners. Sharp edges betray anxiety, you explain. He agrees, though he's not entirely sure what that means. The bath becomes your war room in exile. You review letters while soaking, plot possible returns, dictate curt replies to newspapers. One aide claims you mapped out the entire escape from Elba with a sponge in one hand and a loofah in the other. Probably exaggerated, but undeniably on brand. And when you return, briefly, spectacularly to France, you bring the tub with you. Of course you do. But the comeback is short. The drums fade, the maps turn red again, and eventually, inevitably, St. Helena. Now the air smells of salt and surrender. Your quarters are damp. The bed creaks. The food is tragic. But you cling to the routine. Warm water, scented cloths, the familiar scrape of copper being scrubbed. Your captors are British, mostly permit the bath, but watch it carefully. They don't trust you. Not the tub either. One of them even inspects it for secret compartments, finds only soap. Probably scented with betrayal. Still, you make do. You've been soaking for hours now. Not to plot, not to scheme, just to float, to drift inside the last luxury that no empire can take. You stare at the ceiling and let the steam remind you of better rooms, better roofs, better ceilings. Sometimes you speak aloud. To no one, or maybe to history. Once a servant hears you whisper, "Water was always the throne." The rest was just noise. Historians still argue about what you meant. Perhaps nothing. Perhaps everything. The bath on St. Helena is less grand, of course. A patched tub, a bucket chain for warm water, and a cranky fireplace that takes half an hour to heat. But even stripped of gold and bees and fluted faucets, it remains sacred. One day, a storm rattles the windows while you soak. A valet rushes in. You don't flinch. "Let the lightning strike," you say. "At least I'll die clean." Another time, you're too weak to climb out alone. 2 orderlies assist. One slips. Everyone falls. You chuckle not loudly, but with a hint of the old glint. "The bath strikes again," you mutter. They don't get it. You don't explain. Even in your final weeks, the tub is there. Some days, it's the only place you feel like yourself. Not the prisoner, not the fallen general. Just the man who once understood the power of heat, steam, and silence. The man who, for a time, bent nations and bathed with intent. A fringe story from a sailor claims that, after your death, one of the attendants wanted to keep the tub. "It still smells like empire," he said. "No one knows where that tub went. Maybe to a museum, maybe to scrap, maybe, just maybe, to someone who understood. And when the time comes, when you lie still, unmoving, as the candles flicker and the world fades, there's talk among the attendants. Should we bathe him? One asks. No, another replies. He's clean enough. And that's how it ends. Not in battle, not in glory, but with the quiet respect reserved for a man who, even in exile, knew the value of being warm, damp, and briefly, beautifully, at peace. So tonight, if your water cools a little too fast, or your soap slips from your fingers, think of Napoleon not just as a general, a tyrant, a lawmaker, but as a man who, through it all, kept one corner of comfort, one routine of dignity, and one copper throne no revolution could ever topple. The candlelight flickers, catching the edge of the tub one last time. The palace, or what's left of it, is quiet now. Footsteps echo in polished corridors that no longer host generals or lovers or arguments about breakfast. What remains is a room, a basin, a scent faintly of soap and memory. And a question. What does one do with the emperor's bathtub after the emperor is gone? Posthumous rituals are delicate things. In the days following your death on St. Helena, the British administrators proceed with what they call orderly dignity, which mostly means folding linens, cataloging possessions, and quietly deciding who gets what. There's the uniform you wore on campaign, the sword, the letters, the books, even your toothbrush is inventoried with the care of a sacred relic. And then there's the tub. It sits, empty, yet somehow still heavy. Not just in weight, but in presence. Because this isn't just plumbing. This is where treaties were imagined, wounds were soothed, pride was reheated, and loneliness soaked away into steam. The first order of business is practical. Does anyone want it? The British don't. Too large, too French, too complicated. The French. Well, the officials back home are divided. Some see it as an artifact, others as a reminder. And at least one foreign diplomat reportedly said, "Let us bury the body, not the bathwater." But someone eventually claims it. A valet or perhaps a low-ranking officer stationed at Longwood House. He sees it not just as salvage, but symbol. He cleans it, restores it, ships it back across the sea. It ends up in a storage room, then a gallery, then decades later, a museum. Today, if you visit that museum, you'll find the tub in a quiet corner. No velvet ropes, no grand plaque, just a small sign, polite and hesitant, copper bathtub. Believed to have belonged to Napoleon Bonaparte, site of reported incident. The incident, of course, is not detailed, but the guards know. They smile when people ask. Yes, one says, that tub. Another nods solemnly and whispers, 3 hours, they say. He wouldn't call for help. Visitors take pictures. Children giggle. A few devoted historians kneel beside the rim, tracing fingers over the worn brass lip, trying to imagine what it was like. One tourist allegedly dropped a coin into it and wished for confidence. Another asked whether anyone ever tried to sit in it. Only once, the docent replies. He couldn't get out either. Fringe fact? The floor beneath the tub has been reinforced twice. Not because it's heavy, but because people lingered too long beside it. The museum got tired of explaining why the parquet kept squeaking. What makes this odd relic endure? Perhaps it's because, in a life so full of battles and borders, here lies something mundane, intimate, human. The tub wasn't carved from marble. It wasn't gilded or encrusted with diamonds. It was a working object, functional, warm, a container for stillness in a life that rarely paused. Some say the tub witnessed the real Napoleon, not the pose on the horse, not the silhouette on the hilltop, but the man who sighed, who soaked, who scrubbed away not dirt, but doubt. There are rumors, of course, that Josephine's scarf was once left draped over its edge. That was the last place he ever smiled. That during a thunderstorm, he once fell asleep in it and dreamed of victory, or of childhood, or nothing at all. But the tub offers no answers. It doesn't speak. It doesn't gleam. It just waits. There's something oddly comforting in that, in the idea that even legends needed hot water, that even giants had their rituals, that beneath every crown lies a man with sore feet and a fondness for neroli oil. The museum closes, the lights dim. The last visitor hesitates, looking over their shoulder. And still, the tub remains, patient, solid, slightly dented on the left side. They say that's from the incident. So tonight, before you drift off, picture that quiet corner of the museum. Picture the soft brass gleam. Picture the man who once sat there, stripped of medals, tired of war, thinking of maps he could no longer change, and steam he still could. And know this: if greatness fades, it does so with bubbles. And sometimes it ends in a towel. The bathwater tonight holds a strange stillness. It's not colder than usual, nor too hot. It's perfectly warm, gently scented with something floral, maybe leftover lavender or neroli, but it feels different, quieter, more final. You ease yourself into the familiar copper tub one last time. The water laps softly around your ribs, steam curling upward into the dim light. You rest your arms along the worn rim, the metal smooth beneath your elbows, as if it remembers your shape. No one rushes in with dispatches. No valet adjusts the towel just so. No footsteps outside the door. For once, the world is not knocking. And maybe that's the gift of it. Because here, there are no emperors, no campaigns, no exile, no adoring crowds or mocking newspapers, no France, no England, no island. Just you and the silence and the warmth of water that asks nothing in return. This tub has been with you through everything, through ambition and exile, through triumph and illness, through marriages, betrayals, coronations, and collapses. While generals argued and ministers plotted, while continents shifted and soldiers marched, this one, humble bath, was always here, waiting. Tonight, as you soak, the copper glows faintly in the firelight. A single candle flickers beside the hearth. Your breath moves slowly. Your heart does not race. You are not calculating anything. You are not proving anything. You are just being. And it is enough. Historians will never write about this moment. They'll speak of battles and treaties, of crowns and coalitions. They'll forget that the greatest minds of their time also needed rest. That empires may rise and fall, but a bath can hold a kind of truth no statue ever will. You think briefly of Josephine. You see her smile again, that tilted, mischievous thing. You remember the way her letters smelled of perfume and ink. You remember the warmth of her hand on your shoulder. You don't speak her name out loud. You don't need to. She's there in the room, in the silence between drips of water. You close your eyes. For a long moment, everything disappears. St. Helena, France, your titles, your losses, your aching body. What's left is soft and human and private. The world doesn't need to understand it, but you do. Some truths are for soaking in, not shouting from balconies. You let your fingers drift through the water, tracing tiny ripples. The sponge floats beside you just as it has for years.
You smile at it, faintly amused. Of all the loyal subjects you ever had, this one never complained. And now the water begins to cool. You rise slowly. There is no rush. You reach for the towel with hands that no longer grasp at glory, but at softness. You dry yourself with reverence, not because you are fragile, but because you know how to savor what's fleeting. The robe wraps around you. The firelight dances across the floor. You pause just for a moment to look back. The tub sits quietly in the middle of the room, empty now, still warm. The sponge rests against its side. The water drips once, twice, then stops. No trumpets, no applause, just stillness. Maybe someday someone will find this old copper bath. Maybe they'll place it in a museum behind glass. They'll argue over its dimensions, the angle of its curve, and the way Napoleon once got stuck in it for 3 full hours. They'll laugh, maybe, or look impressed. But they won't know what it really held. Not just water, but memory. The memory of a man who, for all his victories and defeats, understood the quiet power of soaking away the day. And as you turn to leave, body wrapped, mind empty, you carry that final piece with you, not as a conqueror, not as a myth, but simply ask yourself,